Welcome to Loss of a Spouse seminar, which is produced by Ladies Ministry. I am Jean Carney, Director of Women of Worth. Who better than Sister Thetus Tenney, who is not a stranger to anyone, and Brother Kevin Cox, who is the Superintendent of the Louisiana District, to help us cope with the loss of a spouse. Listen in as they share with us. Thank you for coming today.
We welcome you today to a visit between Sister Thetus Tenney and myself, Kevin Cox, talking to women and men who have lost a spouse in the ministry. Obviously, since the vast majority of the ministry of the United Pentecostal Church is comprised of men, our focus today will probably target more those ladies who have been left behind when their husband has passed away. But I'm so happy to have Sister Tenney here with us. And I want her to begin and then say a few things about herself, and then we're going to just have some fun conversation back and forth.
Well, Brother Cox, you and I both share in the experience, the sorrow, the adjustments of having lost a spouse. How many years were you and Delisa married?
We were married 32 years plus.
Well, Tom and I were married 65 years. I have often said, I hardly remember life before him. In fact, your life changes so much when you become a married couple. It's a twosome all the way that really your single life kind of fades away. What was the biggest adjustment for you?
My biggest adjustment sounds so simple, but it was being alone. Realizing your mind would play tricks on you. I'd come into the house thinking she'd be there, and that your mind would tell you a few seconds later, no, she's not here. Even now, 8.5 years later, I'll be somewhere ministering, whatever it happens to be, see something that's unusual, or maybe see a beautiful house piece or something. I'll think, I need to call Lisa and tell her about that. Mm-hmm. The moment I think that, my brain says she's still not here. But that's probably the most difficult thing for me to deal with, is just simply being alone.
I agree with you. There is, you don't really ever, I don't think you ever really know what alone means until you lose a spouse, because your lives have become so entwined with one another that, everything I thought about, everything I did, Tom was a part of it. And then suddenly he's not there. And the thing that I miss the most, among many things, but the thing I miss the most is talking to him. How about you?
Absolutely. Just being there, just in their presence. And Sister Tenney, you well know that Brother Tenney and I worked together and rode many miles together, the two of us. Mm-hmm. And then there were a lot of times when it was the four of us,
yes.
You, Lisa, me, and Brother Tenney together. I treasure those times. I really, really do. We know each other in that sense, but what I can so well remember riding down the road with Brother Tenney, phone would ring. I had always thought maybe Brother Tenney just, studied up those little sayings, but he's on the phone talking to you, and out they come. He's on the phone talking to his son Steve, son-in-law Steve, or Terry, or his son Tommy, and they just rolled on out. You missed those kind of little nuance things that were specific to them.
Those are the kind of things that made life so special. One of the things that I really missed terribly, for as long as we were married, Tom and I had coffee together twice a day. And I've often said that I think our marriage was built on a coffee cup. But it was just our time together. It wasn't anything special as far as, we did such and such or talked about. Sometimes we hardly talked, but we just had coffee together. And sat down and were together. Exactly. And I miss that. In fact, I hardly drank coffee for a while after he died. And then I started drinking, but Tom had always, he liked 2 cups of coffee in the morning. And we always had 2 cups of coffee in the morning. And then now I still only drink 1 cup. and never drink a cup of coffee without wishing he was in the other chair. Your life is just bound up together. Another thing I wanted to mention to you is, have you changed things in your surroundings, in your house? Or, some people, they can't stand to change something, and others find it a relief to change things.
Basically, Sister Tenney, if you walk in my house now, it's maybe not as clean as it was, particularly the windows.
She was a window washer.
But everything else in that house is 8.5 years old right now, so to speak. I really haven't changed anything unless it was something of necessity.
Well, and it's been different for me. After Tom died, I could hardly go in my living room. And of course, I had to pass through it. But I quit sitting in there at all. We had recliners side by side. And I got where I never did sit in there at all. And the kids fussed at me and said, "Mom, why aren't you doing that?" I said, "I don't know. I just can't do it." So Terry said, "Mom, why don't you change the living room?" And I did. I redid the living room, and it has helped me. I can enjoy my living room. There was just something about me sitting in my chair and his chair being vacant I couldn't take. But I think this points out the difference in people, and everybody handles grief differently. Everybody's relationship was different, and so you have to adjust. To some people, it's comforting to not change anything. To other people, it helps them move on with life, because even when you lose a spouse, life doesn't stop.
Right.
It just goes on, and you have to go on living. And for me, I had to make some changes for me to be able to cope.
Sister Tenney, I'll ask you this. The one thing I did change, Lisa would be very upset because she was a good decorator, as you well know. But I have a huge picture of her that I have in my bedroom. Of course, I've got other pictures of her around the house, but that big one's in there. And people might think I'm crazy, but I still talk to that picture as if I'm talking to Lisa. Have you ever done that?
Yes, and in fact, that was one of the questions I was going to ask you. I have an aunt that she doesn't like pictures of people, especially of her family that has gone on in death. She won't put any of them out in her house. I have pictures of Tom in every room in my house, including the kitchen. Mm-hmm. And to me, they're comforting. And like you said, just a couple of nights ago, I sat down at my desk, and I have 2 pictures of him on my desk. And, of course, you always get that emotional rise when you look at the pictures and your mind thinks. And I had a little conversation with him. I know that seems strange, but it's comforting to me. Another thing, and I have found that people really differ with this, is, do you visit her grave?
Yes, not as much now as I did at the first. Be honest with you, it bothers me a little bit. And then I came to the realization she's really not there.
Right.
We put her body there, but she's somewhere with the Lord.
Well, I feel the same way. It just so happens that I still visit to go by the grave. I don't stay a long time. In fact, I seldom get out. I can pull right up beside his grave, and it's strange as it may seem, I will discuss with myself things that I'm trying to make a decision. It just seems like that it helps me to be there. Mm-hmm. But I understand that as time moves on, and some people, they continue to go a lot. Other people, they find it very distressing to go. I think all of these things, how you handle it is a very personal matter. And I don't think you need to be pressured by what other people think.
My father-in-law lost his wife not quite 2 years after my wife died. And of course, he and I are still wonderful friends. I go to see him often. And he told me a while back, and he loved his wife dearly. He really did. He said, I went to the grave and told her, said, now, Levita, I'm not going to be coming out here as often because it hurts me too bad every time I come. But I still love you. That was his way of dealing with it. Sister Tenney, I have this question for you because I always wondered before I lost my spouse. How should I treat other people who had lost their spouse? In other words, when I'm with them, are you comfortable with me bringing up Brother Tenney? Does it make you feel better, worse, or you understand
Well,
my question?
for me, Brother Cox, I delight in having people
I do
remember
too.
and reminisce about him, things he said, things he did.
Yes.
Yes, I like it now. Some people, it may be painful.
Not with me. I love to hear the stories. In fact, not too long ago, I gave one of the last remaining dresses that I have that Lisa had to one of the young ladies here at this church, POA, and she sings on the praise singers. It's a dress that I bought Lisa not long after we had got married, for a Christmas or a birthday, I can't remember, maybe a year or two after we got married. And I asked her one day, I said, you kind of like retro looking stuff? Yeah. And she and her boyfriend were there at the campground. I said, come here, I want to show you a dress that was Lisa's. And I said, do you like it? Oh, I love it. And so she slipped into another room, tried on, put it on over top of the clothes she had, actually. Came back out and said, what do y'all think? And it was beautiful. A couple weeks later, she had it on singing on this platform. And it gave me such a wonderful feeling to see that dress that my wife had worn quite a few times that I had given her on that young lady. Do you ever feel that way?
Yes, I gave a lot of Tom's ties to either young men that he had worked with a lot, or especially to our children, son-in-law, son, grandson. And it's a comfort to me to see them when they wear his ties. Mm-hmm. It's a comfort. You know, another thing, Brother Cox, that I think is very important, and we need to mention it while we're talking about this, is maintaining your friendships.
Oh, yes.
Friendships can be awkward after you lose your spouse, especially I think it is for a woman. How do you feel about that?
I understand exactly what you're saying. And one of the things that I'm so grateful for is that my wife and I were close to each other, both sides of our family. We never had family issues, thankfully. Obviously, my sister and I still get along wonderful. But I'm very grateful to tell you that I still get along with her father. Of course, her mother's passed now. Both of her sisters and their husbands, they're all in the ministry. So much so that we even take vacations together at times. And it feels good to know that we are together, because and I recognize that's family, but I'm thankful for good family. And yet, there's that certain, maybe the word is uneasiness. You go to a general conference, your friends are there. You've always gone to dinner with them before, but you're now the odd one out. And so you have to be very careful that you don't, some are just so glad and others are like, well, whatever. And then the situation, like we used to go out every year at conference with special friends. And now some of my special friends, their wives are still alive, their husbands are dead. I helped preach their funeral. They were friends. Now how do we treat each other? If we go out with our others to dinner together, are people going to think that we're anything besides just old friends? Do you ever experience that?
Yes, I have, and not as much as you have because of my age, but I do think that it's so important, Brother Cox, to maintain your friendships.
Yes.
And of course, Tom, one of his strong points was to cultivate friends, real friends, close friends, and to give enough time in your life to your friends to develop the right kind of relationship. And if you have those kind of friends, you need to maintain that friendship because you need the strength that those friends bring. Mm-hmm. But you have to put forth the effort. Sometimes you don't, because you, as you said, you're the odd man out. It's a little awkward, but you have to override some of that because your friendships need to continue. They will be strengthening to you and to them because some of them will be losing their spouses too, and you need to understand how they are and maintain them. Another thing I'd like to mention is stay busy.
Oh, yes.
It, to be productive, of course, I was blessed in the fact that I was very involved in ministry, along with Tom, and
Right.
then even outside of with him, just on my own. So it gave me an outlet, but I am so grateful that I have been able to stay busy and feeling productive. But having some goals in life, some things you're interested in doing is very important. Depression can be a major part of losing a spouse, and being active
That's
is
right.
one of the best deterrents to that.
That's correct. Sister Tenney, this book right here, and I brought it on purpose, is called Letters from Friends. It's numbers of people in here, authors. In fact, I'm one of the chapters. It says down at the bottom, edited by Norma Clanton. Norma and Charlie Clanton were our friends. Been for years. Charlie died about a year after my wife died, and I was part of the ministry at his homegoing. My brother-in-law and he were just the best of friends. Roy preached the main message. At that funeral, knowing that I've got a little bit of experience in financial situations, I mentioned to Norma, and then later I wrote her an email. I said, Norma, anything I can help you with, I'm willing to help. I'm not trying to be boyfriend, girlfriend. I'm trying just to simply let you know I've been down that road. That was what brought this book about, not instantly. But I sat down one night just out of kindness of what we talk about, old friends, and I wrote her an email. Said, take what you like of it, what you don't like, etc. And one of the things or several of the things that are in here that I mentioned have to deal with finances.
That's another thing, Brother Cox, that is a major part of losing a spouse.
When somebody, in my case, Lisa was the organizer, she was the administrator type, but I handled almost all of the financial situation. I wonder what would happen had I gone first. And I tried ahead of time to have things in order. But there's one thing that I would highly advise is, and of course we're talking to people that's already been down that road, but trust somebody to help you if you're not good with that. I had told my wife more than once, I said, if I die prematurely, you're left behind. You can trust my dad. And there's a man that I worked for when I first got out of college, a CPA. I said, you can trust that man. We were at my mother's funeral, and I introduced my wife. She had already met that man, but had never met his wife. And when I introduced her, she said, oh, my husband has always told me that if anything happened to him, get a hold of your husband. What a blessing it was when that woman looked at her and she said, that's something, she said, because my husband's always told me the same thing about your husband. Trust him. When you pass, some things are going to hit you right broad in the face. You've got to handle them right quick. You've got life insurance, perhaps. Certainly, if your husband was a minister with an organization, there's going to be a life insurance policy and other policies. Perhaps he was a veteran. Maybe he was a disabled veteran. You've got to get busy and do that kind of things. And I know we're running out of time to talk about it, but if I could give you one advice, it's simply to get someone you trust to help you with that. Would you agree with that?
I agree 100%. I really do. I was very blessed in the fact that my husband had turned our finances over to a bookkeeper, which has been a tremendous blessing for me. But even, Brother Cox, I call you when I have a certain problem that I want to know what to do. Yes. I'm having a car repaired right now because of you told me where to go. Yeah. Find somebody you can trust, and Amen. Don't be afraid or ashamed to ask a question.
That's right. I fully agree. Sister Tenney, I've enjoyed this conversation. We may as well let everyone know we have conversations all the time.
We sure do, and I appreciate it so much. Brother Cox has been a tremendous blessing in my life.
And thank you for loving us. God bless you.
Bless you.
God bless you all.